Alright, so we're moving on. Now we want to create a simple little drum pattern here. We're going to use our second MIDI track to do so. And we're going to our instruments in the browser, and we're picking up a drum rack. And drop instrument or sample down here, click on this MIDI track, load up the drum rack, and it will show down here. We have 16 positions where we can load in drums. We have even more, but let's stick with these 16 for now. And now we can go back to our course files folder, to the samples. And the first thing we want to do is put a clap into the drum rack. We're going to put our clap on position D1. So I'm selecting D1 here, this drum rack pad, and I'm dragging this clap sample onto D1. And what happens? We are creating a new simpler device on D1 right now. We can see how it plays back if we hit playback here. And we can load several simpler devices onto several drum rack pads here, which is really nice. Actually, we can open up this chain list view, and it will show all devices that have been loaded up into the drum rack here. So let's quickly take another one, another element. Let's take this off hi-hat. And drag it onto F#1. And you see now we have two devices loaded up here, and we can switch back and forth between those waveforms. Now let's set up a MIDI clip to create some playback information here. So I'm going onto drum rack, into this area here, into this clip slot, and I'm double clicking to create a new MIDI clip, and this one now looks a little different from the first one here where we didn't have a drum rack, because the piano roll now only shows those two options, off hi-hat and clap. And if we activate this little editor preview headphone, we can click on these notes and actually preview what we are playing here. So this is very helpful. And let's put in our clap for now at the second and at the fourth position of our pattern. Double clicking. And now I'm going to play it back with the kick. I'm hitting space to stop the playback. Whenever you see this little gray box here, I hit my space bar to stop or start the playback, and actually bringing down the volume fader a little bit here on this drum rack channel, because I have the feeling this clap is a bit loud in general. I want to just make it a bit quieter compared to the kick now. It's a bit too quiet. I'm bringing it back up a bit. So this is one way of adjusting the overall loudness of the output of our drum rack, but we can also go back to our devices view here. And, if we open up this chain list like we have here, we have another control down here where we can control the loudness or volume of the individual elements that are forming part of the drum rack towards one another. And I can also bring this clap down here. If I'm clicking into this vol area and I'm like turning down my mouse, it will go down in the loudness. And this is also possible, especially if we're going to put in the second element right now, our hi-hat. Going back into the clip, I can double click into this area or go back down here. And I'm going to create a little offbeat hi-hat pattern. That's always the third position of a beat. So, and play it back. Okay, and this is our simple pattern here. And now there's a difference to the piano pattern view, and there's a difference to the MIDI editor of a drum rack compared to another MIDI editor that is this one here for our kick sample, that's also part of a simpler device, but not taking part in a drum rack. Because if we're taking a look at this MIDI information here, we actually have to take care of the actual pitch of our sample, because C3 is the default pitch of the sample as it's intended, as it was recorded, as it was saved. And if we go up, you will notice how the pitch increases. So pitch goes up higher. If I hit Shift arrow key down while selecting everything, I can go one octave lower. And I can hit arrow key down to come back to C3. Okay, so you see in the drum rack MIDI editor, it's different. We are by default always playing the default pitch of every single element. And if we want to adjust pitches, we can do that in our simpler devices here in the transposition area. But we will talk about that later. Okay, so before we go on adding a couple more elements into our drum rack down here, I'm going to click on this clip, right click, rename it to drums. Just so we are clear here. And let's pick up a couple of elements for our drum rack. For example, pick up this hi-hat element and put it into this position, G#1. Dragging it down here, see it shows up there, and we're picking up another off-hat open hi-hat sample, and we're placing that on top of the other one, A#1. And while we are at it, we are also going to put in two tom sounds, low and mid. Low will be placed on G1, so here, and mid goes to A1. So you might be wondering, why does it matter where exactly we are placing these elements in our drum rack here? It actually follows a quite established layout that is very convenient for finger drumming. For example, if you're working with Ableton Push or some other external MIDI device that you could use for finger drumming, usually you put your kick on C1, you have your claps or snares in this position, and also the respective other elements have their typical positions. So we're trying to follow this pattern here because it's also convenient if you were to, for example, save this MIDI file and send it over to a friend who has a default drum rack loaded up. It would actually work for him because the kick would be playing in the position where he also has his own kick placed, and the snare as well. Alright, so quickly going back into our clip and actually use some of these sounds right now. We have clap and off hi-hat. We have another open off hi-hat here. And this one is going to play along with the first one, the closed one. I'm selecting all of these four. I'm hitting Option or Control on Windows, and then I'm dragging it up. So now we have those two elements playing in the same position, and we have another third hi-hat here. And this one is going to play a 16th notes pattern. So right click into the area, make sure you're in the fixed grid, select 16th notes, and then we are drawing in every note. And we can also draw these a bit faster by hitting B on our keyboard. You see the mouse is changing into a pencil, and we just go and draw them out here. This is also possible. But let me quickly go back. I'm hitting B again, and I'm hitting Command Z because I want to open up the velocity down here. So make sure this arrow is up, and we open it up a bit further so we can see what we are doing here. And we want to edit the velocity of this hi-hat quickly, so the intensity of the playback basically. select all of them. If we drag them down, you can actually see the current value here or down here in the status bar around this area. Watch that. If I hover over a single note, you see the actual value, 55 right now. What we are going to do is maybe start a bit higher with the first one, 70, then select the second one a bit lower, because we want a little bit of groove in here. So we are switching around to avoid sounding boring or repetitive. Take the third one, drag it up. This one is supposed to be the loudest here in this series of notes. So I'm putting that to roughly 90. It's not about the exact numbers here, it's just have them play a little differently from one another and bring the fourth one down again. Okay, and now I'm going to copy this pattern by going into this area here, selecting all four, hitting Option while holding it. I'm dragging all four to the next beat pattern. And now I'm selecting the last one and I'm increasing the velocity intensity. And make sure to not get confused if you have multiple velocities in one position, as with this off hi-hat here, for example. If it's really very disturbing for you, what you can do is quickly just take them off and put them back in later, just to assure yourself that you've done a good job here. Now you can look at the pattern and you have so this is a little bit more dynamic right now, and we can copy the entire thing to the second part, holding Option again. And I'm quickly going to copy back everything else we have here. So this is a manual way of playing around with the drum rack and the MIDI editor of the drum rack. You can also use Ableton Push or Launchpad or whatever you have to just hit record and come up with that by yourself if you're hitting with your fingers on those pads here. Because as we are playing it back now, you will see these pads triggering the sounds as we are passing their position. Now the first thing you notice is the mix is kind of weird. It sounds a bit weird still. So let's quickly take a look at these volumes down here and adjust them a little bit. So I definitely want to take down this hi-hat, this one here. I'm bringing this down to -14 or something. Maybe a bit further up. So -10 right now. So these hats are very loud still. Off hi-hat. This one, taking this one down. And the off hat open. Bringing this one down. That's too much. Let's play it. And while the positioning works, we still have a lot of work to do here. We won't do everything in this little video, but I want to adjust one thing right now. So we're going onto this hi-hat. That's the quick one. Actually, if I'm hitting on this S here, I can listen to this one in solo and mute all the other ones here inside of the drum rack. But I'm still playing the kick, so this is quite helpful. So it's about this one right now, and let's quickly move over to our simpler device here and sort of manipulate the sound of that hi-hat for a moment. Actually, we're in one-shot mode right now. We will talk about the different modes a bit later, but let's quickly switch into classic. Okay, so I'm quickly switching into the classic mode, and I wanna play it shorter. So you can have it start later with this one here, or you can have it finish earlier with this control here. And let's actually try to make it shorter. Something like this maybe. Let's have a listen. Okay, so shortening the sound, and actually take the magnifier and zoom in a bit more. And you see it's also one of those samples that starts a little late, so we want to adjust for that as well in this case, going a bit more towards the start of the sample. And I'm taking it a bit longer here. All right, so let's take it this short. This one remains roughly shortly behind 100, but the yellow area here skips between 50 and 100. Make sure you have that resting around 80. Just to be sure to make it sound a bit more snappy, we are going to take down the sustain levels a little bit for this element to have it play shorter and stop a bit sooner. See, that's what we're looking for. I'm bringing this down to -15 for now. But if you compare to having the sustain up all the way, it's very brushy if we do this. That way we can manipulate the sound, play it shorter, take a lower sustain, maybe -17, -16. This does, like, the exact value doesn't matter, but we are looking for the certain snappy short feeling on this little hi-hat here. Now we are going back, playing all of them together. So I'm removing this solo knob here or this one here, doesn't matter. They work the same way. This is how you select different sounds in the chain view. Maybe we cut that. Okay. So now we have our first little beat with two MIDI tracks, one playing our kick and the other one playing a complete drum rack with a couple of hi-hat sounds and a clap sound, and nicely organized in a MIDI pattern here, nicely set up in a drum rack. And of course we will continue to work on this a bit later, and we will also refine the mixing, and also we will take a look at the individual panning of these elements to the left or right of our stereo spectrum. So summing up, we took a drum rack from our instruments, we placed it on a new MIDI track, and then we took a couple of our coarse files and samples and filled up this drum rack with a nice little simple housey groove pattern. So let's go on to the next video.